Alright, what's up everyone? How's it going? Welcome back to another Fire Emblem archetype tier list, and today we're going to look at thieves, sneaky boys and girls, assassins, rogues, tricksters, outlaws, that kind of unit. That's what we're going to look at today. People who pick locks, who steal stuff, open chests for you, fog of war vision, all that kind of utility. That's what we're going to look at today. And I think it's an interesting discussion, but it needs a lot of framing, a lot of context for it to make sense, alright? So first of all, this is not going to be a character guide. This is not a recommendation on which thieves to use, because the weird thing about thieves is, in some chapters in Fire Emblem, they're completely useless. You just don't want to field them at all. And in some chapters, you 100% should make room for a thief, because otherwise you're going to miss a bunch of treasure, or you have to fiddle with chest keys, which sometimes works, but it's not always optimal. So thieves are much less of a unit that you can kind of rate overall on like the scale of the whole game, and more on a per chapter basis, but a tier list rates them based on their utility in the whole game. So what I'm going to do is talk about how good they are at, first of all, you know, how useful are they for stealing the treasure, how useful is the treasure that they can steal, how much competition is there for like other thieves. I think a thief gets worse if there are other options for opening chests, there's other thieves, as well as just killing an enemy thief and having them drop the item, or having buyable chest keys or door keys kind of obliviates their need. Marth is available in some games to open chests with the Fire Emblem, that kind of stuff. Or maybe there's just no useful treasure to begin with. Maybe there's just not much to steal at all. Those are the things I want to weigh in. And I also don't want to limit myself just to thief utility. If a thief is good at combat, I want to give him credit for that. That's going to be important in the case of, for example, Soth from Radiant Dawn. Folk is pretty much all combat in Radiant Dawn. Anna has combat utility. Niles is used for capturing, for example. Ash really isn't a thief, but he's the closest thing that Three Houses has to a thief, so I just put him in here. The Thracia thieves can do a bunch of stuff like stealing actual weapons, so there's a lot more going on than just their thievery. And so this tier list is going to rate them overall as units, but their common theme is that they are thieves and they have thief utility for the most part. So that's how I'm going to approach this. But again, if you get to a chapter where your only option for a thief is someone who I'm rating kind of lowly, but you need to deploy a thief to get the treasure, by all means just deploy the thief, because that's what they're good at. It's just maybe that one chapter is like the only one they get in the whole game, and for that reason they'll get a low tier list rating. But it doesn't mean don't use them when they are convenient. Like if you're playing an FE9 Iron Man and your Folk is dead, your FE9 Folk is dead, but you have Soth available, by all means deploy Soth. Right, so that's just how I'm gonna frame this. You might have also noticed, I'm just gonna say this right now, I left out a lot of units that have luck touch in Fates, the ninjas to be specific, like Kaze, Kagero, Saizo. I want to replay Fates at some point in the future soon. I kind of feel like playing it, and I don't think I can really accurately talk about a lot of them. And also there are just a lot of them, like so many, that I don't think it would make sense for me to feel like half of my video talking about a game that I'm not super familiar with. So I decided to just focus on the Outlaw Niles and the Adventurer Shura and leave the rest for later, because I kind of know what they do from a bit of experience, and I figure at some point I may revisit the topic, find an excuse to talk about the ninjas at a later point in the future. The other thing about the ninjas is that the game kind of treats them more like combat units. I discussed this with some people like Rangor for a while, and he's like, you know what, the game really treats ninjas more like combat units with luck touch than units with luck touch that can also fight, if that makes sense. You would never think of someone like Matthew, for example, as a real combat unit. Like Legault can kind of do combat, for example, but their primary function is more thieves. So you can kind of see that in their unit design. Thieves are usually very fast, low strength, low defense, kind of low HP. Just really fast, usually some high skill, depends, but they're not really meant to fight a whole lot. Some of them can do it and it's great, but it tends to be not their main focus. In addition, you might have noticed I made an Archanean please tier at the bottom. That's because imagine if I put all these Julians and Ricardos in the tier list. Actually, it would get really clogged with them, and honestly I think a lot of them are very similar, so you could just assume that these go roughly wherever Julian and Ricardo go, because I think with some exceptions they're generally the same unit. You can argue some of them are better than others, relatively speaking, but the Archanean thieves, I mean, we might as well just get into it, right? The Archanean thieves, I think, are all good. The good thing about them is that Archanean just has a lot of treasure to go through, both in FE1, FE3 Book 1, FE3 Book 2, FE11, FE12. All those games have a bunch of treasure to get. You do have Marth with the Fire Emblem who can open chests, not doors, but you do get some master keys to open doors with sometimes. But for the most part, there's just a lot of them for them to do. There's some chapters where they don't. There's some chapters where they do, but also the treasures is really good. One treasure I particularly like, for example, for FE3 is the Again Staff, which is this absurdly broken thing that you want to get every time. It just makes all your units move again. You get a lot of gold that way, which, for example, Shadow Dragon and New Mystery you can use to make forges. FE12 you can get some star shards by opening chests. They cannot steal, unfortunately. That's one thing they cannot do. So if an enemy has an item, you better hope that they drop it or you're just not getting it. But even without stealing, I think they have a lot of utility. So I think they're roughly A tier. I made a tier list beforehand, so I'm going to double check that I actually think that. I'm pretty sure they're all A tier. So I'm going to put their nice FE1 portraits in A tier right now. I don't think there's too much of a difference between Julian and Ricardo. Most games have one or have more than one thief. And I think sometimes that first thief gets a bunch of stuff that the second thief doesn't, but I don't think that's the case for any of Julian and Ricardo's appearances, or I guess his name is Ricard now. I'm trying to think, but FE1 and its remakes, you get Julian in Chapter 3, but there's no treasure in Chapter 3, Chapter 4, Chapter 5, and then in Chapter 6, or whatever the hallway chapter is in games that cut one of these chapters out. That's when you recruit Ricard, so Julian just opens the door to him, and then from that moment on, they are both equal. So, yeah, Julian is slightly better because there's probably some things that he can do while Ricard is away, like hit like one enemy or something, that makes him slightly better. But other than that, they're the exact same. That's the thing about thieves that just do not focus on combat, which these two don't. They just don't have the base stats for it. Good growth, actually, in some cases, but not great combat overall. But it doesn't really matter if you have bad stats, if all you do is open chests. You just stay out of combat, you stay behind, hide behind the front lines if you can, and just run off and go get treasure. And if you need help killing the enemy near the treasure, then you have to send someone else along because it's not going to be sufficient. So the fact that Ricard has slightly worse bases than Julian doesn't really matter for this kind of stuff. You'll see that come up every now and then. FE12, their availability is kind of the same way, and the same goes for FE3 Book 2. You get Julian in Chapter 3, like by running around a whole map and then just getting him from a village, and there's nothing else for him to do in that chapter, thievery-wise. And in the chapter after that, you don't get anything to do, and if after that, you recruit Ricard, and there's still nothing for them to do. And then in Chapter 6, you get some treasure, and you could use both. But that's why I don't think there's much of a difference in their tier list rankings. Some games, you can argue they're better than others, but like for example, Rangor thought that the FE3 versions of them were the best by far. I don't think it's really worth discussing, and it's also not my area of expertise, but just assume that all of these are along with the other Julians and Ricards in A tier. And if you object to that, feel free to comment, but that's what I think. Next up are the FE4 thieves. These are very interesting because FE4 has no item stealing, but does have gold stealing because every unit has their own gold pool. And thieves are great for manipulating gold in every single way possible. They can take gold from the enemies and they can give it to one of your allies. And this is most useful for allies that aren't very good at procuring gold themselves. And the primary source for gold tends to be arenaing. So if a unit is good at fighting, they'll generally be rich after like the second or third chapter that they're available. If they're not very good at arenaing, then they rely on getting villages, which can be difficult, especially if you're a 5-move unit who doesn't make it there very fast, or for some other reason it might be hard for them to get gold. But Do just solves that problem by himself because he joins with a bunch of gold he can give away, and he can also just start stealing more. Of course, Do is one of the many thieves that doesn't have very good combat. He doesn't have pursuits. He has very low base stats. His growths are okay. He's often praised as a unit who has good growth despite not having Holy Blood. But even his growths are like in the 40s, which by FE4 standards is not super great. So I never really put too much stock into that. And then his bases are just so trash that his combat, it doesn't go off until he promotes. Now when he promotes, he becomes a rogue, and this is something that the FE1 thieves, for example, cannot do, is promote. Do becomes a rogue, he gets pursuits, he gets, I think, a huge strength bonus. He doubles everything, of course, because he's just so fast that he gets a lot of speed. Actually gonna look up his promo bonus because I'm curious right now. This is why we DM Oifi the bot. Oifi, tell me. FE4 rogue, what did we do? Okay, he gets 4 strength and 5 speed and 4 defense, so like a huge difference. He also, I think this is the only class in FE4 that has exactly 7 move. Some of them have like 6, some of them have 5, some of them have 8, but I think this is the only one I can think of that has 7 move. Just a little bit of dumb trivia there. So I think Do is very helpful because FE4 Gen 1 does have a couple units that really want to get a gold donation to pay for their costs. Ideen is someone I used to give a lot of gold to repair her staffs, because Ideen before promotion cannot gain money through the arena. She just cannot fight. She doesn't have the ability to use tomes. Lacus is I sometimes give gold to if I want to buy the Paragon ring with her. I generally don't bother. I just return spam without Paragon until she reaches level 20. And she's also just filthy rich by herself because she joins with, I think, 10k. The Night Ring she doesn't really want after chapter 3 max, and even then before then you can sell it. So that's another 20k that she can get. So that alone is like 30k. She can get some from the arena. She can sell the Miracle Sword if you don't want to keep it, but it is useful for arenaing sometimes. And she also gets the Earth Sword, which also sells for a massive amount of money. So Lacus doesn't really need gold that much, but it can be an option if you want to give her just a little bit more. And I think in ranked runs, for example, this money management is very key, and you want to give gold to a unit who's been left behind on gold early on, like maybe a Zell or something needs some money. But there's usually like at least one person. Like none of these are ideal candidates for giving money, I think, but there's always someone who appreciates that money boost and can really put it to use. Do also has bargain, which means he buys items for half price, and you also sell items for half price. So that basically means as long as you have a gold pool to work with, you can buy whatever you want. And after you're done with it, like let's say you want to buy something for the arena, like you need like a speed ring or a power ring to have more power to actually win in the arena, you can use that, gain money in the arena, and then sell it, and you've still made a profit. You still gain the XP, but you didn't actually pay for it. Of course, to do this, you need to not give away that money from Do, so the other characters that really want that gold won't have it for a little bit, but that is something that Do has as an option. Of course, he also has an easy time just buying the Paragon band for himself to gain arena, to gain experience in the arena, or just gain it from the field. So whenever Do has 20k or more, he can buy the Paragon for 20k, use it to get it however far he wants to get to in arena, and then sell it. I think this is mostly useful after he promotes and he just gets good in the arena, because before that he can get like 1 or 2 rounds in, depending on how lucky he gets, but it's kind of hard to win in the arena with him sometimes because his bases are so bad. Doesn't have pursuit. He also has C rank swords, and that means he cannot use the hero sword, and that's a really big bummer for him. But overall, I think Do is very helpful. Now the Gen 2 thieves, I'm just gonna do him right away because you might expect them to end up in the same place. I think Do is like an A tier. Like I think he's worse by a bit than Julian and Ricard because, like I said, I think it's useful. There's like one person who appreciates it, but other than that, I don't think he does a whole lot for other people unless you're playing a ranked round. But this is more about a general gameplay, like normal gameplay. I don't think a lot of people play ranked, and I think for those, Do is helpful, but not as like important as these guys. Patty and Daisy are the Gen 2 thieves. Patty's the kid of Bridget, and Daisy is the substitute for if you didn't pair Bridget up. And I think they're pretty similar to each other, but I think they're worse than Do by a fair amount. And the reason this is because in Gen 2, you usually have your needs set out more. You have the good weapons, you have all the stuff you need, and you don't really need to grind anyone up per se. That's really worth it. I guess there's Leaf, but you can set that up through inheritance. I think the main difference is if you need a lot of gold in Gen 1, your only option is charity from Do or like getting villages. Whereas in Gen 2, if you need a unit to have a lot of stuff, you can just pass them down that stuff. And the only units who really need a gold donation would be, I guess, the units that cannot inherit anything, like substitutes, or units that just cannot inherit anything, like Julia or the other, set characters, Eris, stuff like that. But those units tend to be really good at getting like stuff themselves. Like Shannon never needs any inheritance because he's just so strong anyway. So I think the demand for a thief in Gen 2 is much lower, and I think that's really the key to like tiering in general, but especially for the thieves, is supply and demand. If there are a lot of thieves and there's not a lot of demand for them, then they get a lower ranking. If there is a lot of thieves, like you can replace one with the other, so that makes the value of each of them individually worse. Whereas if there's only one thief in an entire game, you only have one choice to use as a thief, and that's that person. So if there's a lot of treasure to get for one thief, you're good. Now I think every game has at least one thief, and probably more. Why are these out of order? There you go. Every game has at least 2 thieves, I think, so it doesn't really apply anywhere, I don't believe. I mean, I guess Ash is alone in this list, but obviously Ash is not the only way to get treasure in 3 houses. But yeah, that's why I think Gen 2 thieves are a bit worse. So I'm going to go ahead and put them both in B tier, with the caveat that if you're playing a full substitute playthrough, where no one inherits anything, then Daisy becomes more useful than Patty, but it really depends on the context of playthrough. I'm just going to assume that you're rating these thieves in a vacuum, or rather, I'm assuming Daisy is here because she's in the playthrough where everyone else has been paired up, so you still set up inheritance for everyone else but Daisy. But if you're doing a full substitute playthrough, I think Daisy actually skyrockets in value, because then units are a lot more poor. You don't have the opportunity to pass down a bunch of expensive items to kids, besides like Seliph and Leaf, for example. So your options for how to get gold from Gen 1 to Gen 2 are much more limited. And Seliph and Leaf, there's only so much they can get from passing down items, and everyone else wants something as well. So being able to give gold to someone like Tristan or Dimna or Linde or something, or Linda, I think her name is, might be much more useful than Patty giving gold to a bunch of people who have no trouble getting money and expensive weapons anyway. Because substitutes just inherently have less gold. They inherit less from their parents usually. They inherit less expensive weapons. They might not have the money to buy a Paragon ring or something. So Daisy becomes more useful. But in a playthrough, in general, like with no added caveats, I think Patty is always going to be more useful than Daisy. Now, we get to FE5, and FE5 Thieves are something special because they have a constat, and they can use that to determine whether they can steal weapons or not. And you can often steal weapons, and it would be very useful. So, in addition, FE5 just has a lot of treasure to go around, a lot of thief utility to be done. They don't have Fog of War Vision. I don't think they do. Pretty sure they don't. But they can help you steal torches, for example. So in a way, they still help in gathering Fog of War intelligence. But generally their main utility is stealing, especially for Lithis. Lithis is around for the Manster arc, and that is an arc where you need a lot of doors opened and a lot of chests opened for the first part. And also there's a lot of opportunities for him to steal things, particularly tomes. There's a lot of mages, a lot of thunder mages in the Manster arc, and Lithis effectively just one-rounds them with 100% accuracy, like in Thracia. So he doesn't even have to worry about 99 misses. So Lithis just instantly disarms a mage, and this is very useful, especially in Chapter 4X, Chapter 5, but even beyond that it can be nice. You can also steal rapiers in Chapter 6 if you want that, in like somewhat slower playthroughs, which I'm usually doing. There's so much stuff to be stolen just by Lithis alone, and he's just around for almost the whole game too. So there's a lot of utility for Lithis. And the one big drawback for Lithis is enemies really love to target him. He has low luck, so if he doesn't have a scroll, there's a chance he gets crit and just dies. Usually luck not the biggest problem for thieves. They tend to have some of it, but Lithis just kind of has none. You can give him a scroll, like it's easy to prevent, but if you forget, he just kind of has a chance of death every single battle. It's funny because if you're playing the old patch, the Shia patch, it doesn't display crit in battle, it just shows level instead, which is something that Project, I think Little Manster saved. I was going to say Project Exile, I'm not sure if Exile's fixed it, but Little Manster changed that to where level is changed to crit, so you can actually see him get crit, or rather you can see him facing crit rates. Just a little tidbit there. But that's something you have to watch out for with Lithis. Enemies love targeting him. He usually gets 2-shot. So if you're stealing something with him, what I'd like to do is have someone else go next to him, trade away all of his stuff, including the thing he just stole, and then he can give you capture bait for other enemies. Of course, you have to be wary of full inventories when doing that. It's particularly hairy in like 4X, because chances are if you're stealing something from an enemy, there's like more enemies nearby, right? You don't want Lithis to be exposed to enemies. You definitely don't want him to get captured and all of his items taken away. So you have to be a little bit deliberate. You can easily lose your lockpicks if you do it wrong. But I think Lithis is a solid A tier. I'm pretty sure I want him at the top of it. Yeah, I'm going to put him at the top of it. I think the Thracia Thieves are a little better than the Archanean Thieves and Do. I definitely think he's better than Do. You could argue that the Archanean Thieves are better, I think, but I generally like Lithis better. Also, a cool thing about Lithis, of course, he has a couple movement stars. I don't really count those for very much because you're generally going to play as if they're not there to make the safest play, because the chance of activating a 1-star movement star is 5%, and then a 2 stars is like 10%. So you're never going to play as if you're going to do it. But sometimes you can move them in a way where it's like, okay, if I get a movement star, I can take advantage, like get an extra treasure this turn, be done with treasure getting every a turn sooner. That can kind of happen, but oftentimes it's not going to benefit you, and the chances of it happening, period, are kind of low. But if you're taking 10 turns in a chapter, you have a 10% chance to activate it, chances are you'll find at least one activation somewhere. So it does, like, the odds of it helping out add up as the longer a chapter goes, but it doesn't happen too often. But yeah, I think Lithis is very good. Laura has a lot of the same utility. She cannot steal tomes, in Manster, but she's still around for it to do all the treasure opening duties that you want to do. She's very good at capture baiting because every enemy has enough build to capture her. Lithis sometimes has more build than the enemy. He has like 6 at base, and enemies have a random amount depending on their class. So sometimes Lithis just cannot be captured by an enemy. They end up attacking him instead, so he actually suffers from success. Lara will never have that happen to her because her build is so low. So that's the main difference, I think, between them when it comes to capture baiting. She cannot steal tomes. She cannot steal... I'm pretty sure Lithis, if he gets one build, he can steal Iron Swords, which can be very helpful for the Chapter 8 boss, because you have to capture him and it can be very luck-based. But if you take away his Iron Sword, it's his only equipable weapon, so you just capture him and it's just over. So if Lithis gets +1 build, count your blessings, because yeah, you can grow build in Thracia. But Lara cannot do such a thing. The nice thing about Lara, besides the capture bait utilities, of course, is she turns into a dancer halfway through the game if you recruit Parn with her. Very Agai promotion that just instantly skyrockets your utility, because now you have a unit that can both steal, open locks, and, you know, dance. Yeah, those are 2 things. That's why I said both. And dancing itself is just worthy of top tier. And like I said, I'm not just counting a unit's stealing utility, but everything else they have as well. So I think Lara is overall a better unit than Lithis. Early on, I think Lithis is more useful, but when Lara turns into a dancer, it's really hard for Lithis to match that kind of utility, especially because you often don't need him when you have Parn available, so he faces a bit more competition with Parn. But Lara is good regardless of whether you have Parn available or not, because dancing is just always so useful. So I would put her here. The one annoying thing I guess about Lara is that dancing gives her fatigue, so you don't want to just dance to grind XP with her, or just dance for the fun of it, because you will end up having to spend S strings or have to sit up chapters with her. So I generally am more deliberate when I dance with Lara or not, but I think that's an interesting trade-off. Usually in FE, it's just kind of a brain-dead move to just dance for someone and gain XP. Their combat is nothing worth running home about. Lara is, of course, like very terrible at actually fighting, so whenever you have her in range of enemies, you really, really want to unequip her to make sure she just gets captured, hopefully with no items on her. Because she just gets one-shot by a bunch of enemies. There are enemies she survives, but they are rare, and at some point she just gets one-shot by everything. So you have to be very careful with Lara, especially around ballistas, long-range tomes, that kind of stuff. It's very easy to lose track and lose your Lara. Lithis will often take a hit. You don't want him to, though, because, you know, the low luck thing. Okay, so next up we have Parn. Now, you could think of Parn as like the first thief with really good combat utility. Like, there's, I guess, the fact that Patty can become really good at combat if you give her the right pairing, the right equipment. Like, she uses like hero swords in some pairings, or if she's promoted, and she gets really good. But Parn is actually good at combat at base with no training whatsoever, and that's a huge boon to his utility. I would still end up putting him in A tier, I think. The great thing about Parn is not just combat, but of course he also just has a bunch of movement. I'm pretty sure he has the same movement as Lithis when he's promoted. I think they're both at 7 or 8. I'm just going to double check that because I want to be sure. Okay, yeah, so Lithis has 7 at base. He just has a point of movement over his thief class, I'm pretty sure. And then Parn has 7 as base as well, because you don't gain movement promotion. Okay, there we go. So they both have 7. Parn has a massive 5 movement stars, so every turn there's like a 1 in 4 chance that he will just move again, and that can be helpful in his joining chapter to complete it more quickly. It's also nice that Parn has that 8 base build. Lithis only gains 1 point of build and promotion, so he gets up to 7. And like I said, that alone, like that 7 build allows him to steal iron swords, and like in one case that's very useful. For Parn, what I like is that he can steal, I'm pretty sure he can steal warp staves at if you get him the body ring from chapter 18, the Xavier chapter. I find that very helpful. I'm pretty sure Lithis can probably do that too, actually, when you think about it. Parn just has, like, his bases are not that great when you look at them at a surface level. He has only 7 strength in chapter 12x. That's not that great. 14 speed is good enough to double, but it's not like he's gonna dodge everything ever. 24 base HP is actually really low, and there's a lot of things that will just 2-shot Parn. But the cool thing about Parn is like 5,000 skills, it feels like. He has soul, so there's like a chance, a skill percent chance that he'll just heal himself whenever he's fighting. With 8 base skills, it's not going to happen a whole lot, but over the course of a longer enemy phase where he's also semi-reliably dodging enemies that can add up to more reliability, he has Vantage, so against like a low HP defense enemy, you could give him like a brave weapon, and he will just Vantage and kill them before they attack him, or if they're like already weakened. These are not super great skills actually, but they can kind of add up to more reliability over enemy phase. I guess the main thing that makes Parn's combat so good is the Pursue Critical. Lara and Lithis both don't have anything worth mentioning when it comes to crit, but Parn has a 5 Pursue Critical rating, and that means that every time he double attacks, his second attack is going to have a 5 times amount of crit that it normally has, so it easily goes up to 100 with just a little bit of crit. The weapon that he joins with, the Kingsword, is pretty good on him if you want him to fight because it has some innate crit, and between that and his skill, I'm pretty sure it reaches like reliable levels of combat. The Kingsword in general is just really good for combat because it's brave and very light, and anyone with, I think, sea swords or higher can use it. So Parn uses it just fine, but I like to give him like a rapier or killing edge and just get reliable crit rates that way. And Parn just really cleans house when you want him to. He is a little bit fragile though, so if you don't want to rely on dodging or soul, you want to limit the amount of enemies he faces. But generally there's a lot of opportunities to Parn to like either sneak in and take a Thunder Tome from a random mage, or just kill something if you want him to. And it's easy to rescue drop him out because his con is pretty low, or keep him safe, or maybe he'll get a movement star. So he's a pretty flexible unit overall. You can just deploy in almost any chapter and get value out of him. So I like him a lot. The only reason to put him a little bit lower than most units, I think, is the somewhat lower availability. I don't think it gets him like super far below, but I'm going to put him like below due for that alone. But I could see it go this way, for example. I actually kind of like this way too, but whatever. I'm just going to stick with this for now. I do think it's a bit worse than Lithis and Lara. When Lara and Lithis they're around for longer. So overall, look at the whole game, I think they're better. But after Parn joins, there's honestly no reason to deploy Lithis in addition to Parn, or instead of Parn, you just use Parn. And there might be chapters where you want like 3 thieves, like you want Lara for her dancing utility, and then you want Lithis and Parn because your team split up, for example, but they're kind of rare. Most of the time I think you'll end up benching Lithis and just using Parn instead of Lithis for a while. But because Lithis is around for longer, I think it's fair to give him the higher rating just based on availability. But if you're looking at a chapter, you're looking at your deployment, please just pick Parn instead of Lithis if you pick one. Unless your Lithis is really good, of course. Like if you level up like 5 build points, just deploy Lithis and steal every weapon you can find. Next up is FE6. Just like FE5, FE6, the Binding Blade just has so much treasure going around that I rate thief utility pretty highly. Also interesting to note, FE5 I think was the first game where you could steal stuff, and in FE6 you can still do it, but in FE5 you needed to have higher speed to steal. FE6 you don't. You don't need higher speed than the enemy to steal. So that's one thing that changed again in FE7, FE8 onwards, I'm pretty sure. But it's nice to keep in mind, for example, for like, you don't have to reach any benchmark for them. You cannot steal weapons anymore, of course, you can only steal items, but that's just the way that most people are used to it anyway, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, FE6 doesn't actually have enemy droppable weapons or enemy droppable items. It's just everything you want to get, you get from chests or from stealing. So there's a lot for these guys to do. I don't know why they removed droppable weapons. Like, it wasn't really in FE5, it wasn't FE4 and in the Archanean games. And pretty sure there's some of it in FE... No, I don't think there's any in Gaiden. I'm trying to think, but I don't think there's anything. But maybe there is. But either way, it's just not it's not in Binding Blade. So, Chad, I'd like to give him credit for the early treasure that he gets when there's quite a lot of it. And there's also a couple chapters in FE6 where you could say you could deploy double thieves to get all the treasure you want. I don't think you ever deploy triple thief in FE6, but you could see like double thief. So even when you get Astor, there's still reasons to deploy Chad sometimes. The notable treasure from FE6 that's like worth stealing, I think the highlight is the Delphi shield from Narshan. He is kind of fast, but like I said, you don't really care about speed when stealing an FE6. And the Delphi shield helps protect Milady or maybe Shanna from arrows from like triple effectiveness, so it's a pretty big deal. The difference between Milady having a Delphi shield and not having a Delphi shield is massive. You need, like, I think from a Nomad, for example, she'd take like 5 to maybe 10 damage depending on the weapon and what exactly what level she's at, what enemy lower trooper we're talking about. But with the Delphi shield, she just tanks them. She just doesn't care. So it can be the difference between taking on like 20 nomads or maybe taking like 3, 4, 5, 6 of them at a time. Pretty big gap in utility there. But there's a ton of treasure in FE6. Now, the sad thing about the thieves in FE6 though is that treasure can be gotten using buyable chest keys and door keys. It can be a little bit annoying to manage your inventory when you have those, but if you plan ahead, you should be able to get all the chests you want to with door keys and chest keys alone, or rather you could. So I think that that hurts their demand, if you will, because, or rather it adds some more supply. So it's almost like anyone could be a thief with that regard. Of course, that means you cannot steal something using a door key or chest key, so there's still some utility for them. But if you have like a chapter that's pretty demanding in unit slots in combat, you might not want to bring a thief. You'd rather just use an inventory slot to bring a chest key. For example, chapter 12X, just off the top of my head, there might be some treasure that you're not going to get if you only bring combat units, but you can just use a chest key to get those chests instead, and you just don't have to waste the deployment slot on a thief. So sometimes it's better to just not use a thief in those chapters. It depends though. Usually you have enough unit slots. Guiding chapters are notoriously stingy with deployment slots, but everything outside of that, it tends to be fine to deploy, like Chad or Astor. So Chad is, I guess he's kind of like Lithus in that his combat, his stats are just completely horrendous early on, and he dies to almost everything. I think in chapter 3 he doesn't quite get one shot yet, but later on he basically does get one shot by everything, especially if he's untrained. He's very poor bases, actually really good growth, especially by FE6 standards, but this he does not promote. There's no reason to ever like raise him up all the way. Even if you promote it, I don't think it would really be worth, because his bases are just so off. I think it's like 3 base strength or something, along with swords. Yeah, it's just really bad damage output. Only 2 defense and base at 16 HP is just not worth. So the only really noteworthy thing about Chad compared to other combat units is like having an extra point of movement, I think, and being really fast. So just based off like thief utility, I would still put Chad in like the bottom of A, because there's so much to steal that it's still worth using him for almost every chapter that he's available in when there's treasure around. Chapter 6 I think is his highlight, where he just gets so much treasure, and there's not a lot of enemies in the way of that treasure. You kill a couple of initial enemies and it's just home free for him. He just raids everything he wants to, and he's the only thief there, so he gets full credit for like a silver lance. I think there's a bunch of gold in those chests. I'm trying to think, there was like one other thing I thought was worth mentioning, but it's slipping my mind. There's the halberd in chapter 3, but it's kind of hard to get if you're playing fast, so I'm not sure if it should count or not. Gold in general in FE6 is of course very good, because there's a lot of good stuff to buy, like killer lances, killer weapons in general, later on the boots, so gold is always worth getting. You can also steal lockpicks from enemy thieves, and they're pretty valuable in FE6, I think partially because they have 30 uses. This also means they never run out of lockpick uses, which is quite fine. So yeah, gold is pretty valuable in FE6, and Chad gets a lot of it. Astor is good for the same reason, but I think he's a little better overall because, you know, combat stats are pretty good. He's actually one of your better combat units for a while. He's not on the level of Rutger, but he's still very fast, and actually has the stats to take a hit and the build to not lose too much speed from a steel sword. I think he has 8 con, so a steel sword weighs 10, so he gets weighed down by 2. Still enough to like have reasonable avoid and double almost everything. So you would actually deploy him in chapters where you need combat for a bit, and not just necessarily thievery. Also, he joins right before chapter 9, which is a Fog of War map, and he can provide fog vision in a couple of other maps as well. Same utility goes for Chad, but if you're only deploying 1 unit for Fog of War vision, I think you'd rather go with Astor, for example. That is something else that they can do that I find very helpful. Stealing, like I said, is really good in FE6. There's not a whole lot to say about the stealing utility that I didn't really say about Chad already. But if you're only deploying 1 thief from the chapter he joins onwards, then you're always using Astor, because he's by far the best stats out of all of them, and his combat is pretty good. The Western Isles are of course notoriously filled with axe users, which he has weapon triangle against, and generally just good avoid rates. They have like probably like 20 hit on him, 20 displayed. So good chances of avoiding, especially with a forest. Not as good against other enemy types, like, I don't know, archers. I don't think he doubles mercenaries always in hard mode, but I could be wrong. So you definitely want to leave those to other units. But when you're finding like a random hand axe pirate or something, and need someone else to like finish it off after he chips it, that's something he's really good for. Did I have him higher or lower than Chad? I'm pretty sure, yeah, I had him higher, which I think is accurate. So I'm gonna put him here. I made like a list ahead of time, so I don't have to think about their exact positions too much. This is what I got. So put him higher than Chad for now. Cath, I think, is a perfect demonstration of supply and demand. So for the longest time, people put Cath along the ranks of like Wendy and Sophia, right? Which makes sense from a practical standpoint. It makes sense that you would never deploy Cass when you have Astor and Chad alive, because they both have better stats. Like, Cass joins later, so less availability, but she also just has word. I mean, actually, her stats are probably a little better than Chad. Maybe not a trained Chad, but she's the 3rd thief. You would never... No one says you ever need Cass for anything, unless your people are dead. But people in those times would always reset for deaths, so that really didn't apply. Like, Iron Mans weren't really a thing back then. So there was no one playing FE6 that saw any value in Cass as a unit and would ever deploy her. And for that reason, they just like put her straight down here. If I had an E tier, I would put her here if I went on our ratings back then. But here's the thing, here's the way I view it. You have 3 thieves, and most of the time when you are looking at treasure, you can use one of these 3 thieves to get it, or chest keys, but let's leave those out of the equation for a second, okay? Because back then they didn't really consider chest keys anyway as like a good option, because why get chest keys when you have thieves? So if you're getting treasure and doing nothing else in the chapter, you're staying out of combat, it really doesn't matter what your stats are. And all these thieves are equally good at getting treasure. It's not like one of them has better lockpicks or more movement than the other. They all have 6 movement, and none of them can promote. So it doesn't really matter at that point if you're deploying Astor, Chad, or Cath. They all do the same thing. And from my point of view, they should get as much credit for a treasure as it is worth divided by the number of thieves. Like, that's like the formula I have in my head. So when Chad is around and he's the only one, he gets full credit for all the treasure. When Astor joins in, they get half credit each because they can both take it. And, assuming, again, they're the only options. They're not because of chess keys. And then Cass is like the third option. So once she joins, they all get a third credit for all the treasure from then on. Of course, Astor and Chad are going to be ranked higher because they've been around for more often, and they have more credit for the treasure that they can get that Cass cannot. But once Cass is around, I don't think she's necessarily worse than these units at getting treasure, so I don't think she should be getting shafted for that. Now, how much you value that is very difficult because even leaving chess keys out of the equation, there is no real reason to deploy Cass. So how much do you value the option of having another thief? If we're talking in terms of if we're taking Iron Mans into account, I think it's not unthinkable that Chad and maybe Astor are dead at some point. Like, you could just fuck up and someone could die. So if you're taking Iron Mans into account, I think Cass becomes a lot better because then your thieves could be dead, but you really want to get the Delphi Shield, for example, or you want to get some treasure somewhere from a chest. And in that case, I think Cass is actually a lot better. So it really depends on how you view things more than how good Cass is objectively as a unit. That's the way I see it. Where did I put her originally? I put her in somewhere in C tier because in most playthroughs she isn't going to be useful. And even if we credit her with even if we leave chess keys out of the equation, viable chess keys, there still isn't that much demand for a third thief on a whole. So getting a third credit for the treasure you can get with her is not a whole lot. There is treasure around, even if you recruit her for chapter 12. I'm just assuming that. I do not think it's worth killing Cath off early on. I've seen some people recommend killing Cath because she makes later chapters harder by actually appearing at all. I think that is technically true, but I would honestly recommend for your first playthroughs or at some point in your first playthroughs, just go for full recruitment and just try to get Cass. It's an extra challenge, it's fun, and it's honestly not too hard to meet. It makes chapters more interesting. I would not recommend killing Cass when you get a chance in chapter 6. So, yeah, that's my little rant on Cass. Her utility, what she actually does, I've gone over with Astor and Chad, so I kind of wanted to get into the economics of things. Okay, FE7. FE7 doesn't have too much treasure. I've come to realize it has some cool treasure. The most notable one that people tend to rave about is the silver card. I think the silver card is nice for ranked runs if you're doing those. I don't think it's necessarily great for vanilla FE7. I've played a lot of FE7 runs on I've played 2 runs on 0% growth now, and I haven't really missed the silver card too much. I usually had enough money to do almost whatever I want. If I didn't, it's because I lost some other kind of valuable treasure along the way. So I don't think the silver card is as big of a deal as some people make it out to be, but I get why it's appealing. You buy items at half price, you can really go nuts and buy I don't know, physics staffs, barriers and stuff. But even without the silver card, I've been able to afford those just fine. You do have to budget a little bit. I think that the way most people play Fire Emblem is if they see a map with a vendor and an armory, they will stock up to whatever they want right now, not necessarily what they need right now, but what they think they will need or what they want. And they'll leave some gold because I might have to get more stuff later, right? So they'll buy until their gold gets uncomfortably low. And I'm able to describe this because that's kind of how I treat it often too when I don't think about gold. But I noticed when budgeting for draft races, for example, that you don't really need as much as you think you need oftentimes, and you end up in the final chapter with a bunch of stuff you bought you never ended up using. So with that in mind, I don't think that a silver card is worth that much. The other treasure, there is still a couple of good things that Matthew can get along the way. There's not much to steal, but there's some treasure that you can't really get with anyone else because you don't get chest keys for a while in FE7. You only get chest keys around the time that you get Legault because you can buy them in the secret shop in Kinship's Bond. I think 5 use chest keys are buyable there. Also in the secret shop in Dragon's Gate, I think you can get some, but it doesn't really matter that much. So Matthew, there's So there's a speed wings in normal mode that you can get from the Zoldam in Pirate Ship, but that's not around on Hector Hard mode. I'm basing this rating on like the hardest mode available for him, which is Hector Hard mode. So that one doesn't really count. There's a Guiding Ring instead, I guess. That one's pretty good if you can get it. Matthew does need to level up speed, or Zoldam needs to roll down speed to get it, but in most playthroughs it should be fine. Matthew will probably get at least 1 point of speed along the way, even if you're not actively using him as a combat unit. He can promote to Assassin, which is not very useful. It's probably the worst promotion I've ever seen, because you don't gain move, you don't gain sword rank, you don't gain all that much. Just to get like 1 strength out of it or something, maybe even 0 strength. What is it exactly? FE7 Matthew. I want to see this. It's like such a bad promotion. Yeah, so he gets HP plus 3, attack plus 1, defense plus 2, res plus 2. That's it. That's his whole promotion bonus. He doesn't get any speed, funnily enough. Also, the Fell contract, it's like you get it very late, and you could just sell it instead for 100 gold. It's one of those super expensive items, just like Dart's Ocean Seal, where it's like, okay, you do get one for free if you want it, but you could just sell instead and buy silver weapons with the gold, right? So it's questionable whether you should even want to use it. So I think Matthew is like, there's a couple things he can do, but overall, not a whole lot of treasure to get in FE7. There is some. The Fog of War vision that he provides, not very useful, given that the Fog of War chapters he's in are generally pretty easy to cheese anyway. I would say he's like on par with like the Gen 2 Thieves of FE4, like a little better maybe. But not all that much. There's like some stuff you can get that's nice. There's like treasure in chapter 15, for example, chapters in the Red Gem in chapter 11. Like kind of nice, but not really necessary. Like a little bit in Gen 2 Thieves, I think is fair. Legault is a bit of an unironic case, so Legault's combat, I would say it's like in a vacuum is about on par with Astor's. I just think Astor's is like much more useful because your options for combat units are much less in FE6 compared to FE7. Legault can also technically promote, but like I said, the Assassin promotion doesn't really do all that much. After Legault joins, there isn't a whole lot of treasure for Legault and Matthew to get, and they also shared credit with themselves. Legault also kind of invalidates himself in a weird way. He steals the member card, which is a very useful item actually. It allows you to buy like physics staves, barriers, and stuff in kinship bonds, torch staves, physics. But you also buy chest keys there, and that makes Legault pretty much useless for the rest of the game when it comes to getting treasure. And honestly, after 22, there isn't really anything worth stealing or worth deploying Legault to steal. There are a white gem and a guiding ring in the desert chapter, chapter 23, that he can get. He can also get desert items, of course, but how useful that is depends on whether you want to use a reset trick or not. There is a trick that you can do in FE6 where if you reset the game and you put it in, and you use a soft reset the game during the chapter, resume, check your stat screen, move them onto a tile where treasure can be found, you just find the item 100% of the time. So it's like reliable RNG manipulation. I'll leave it up to you whether you think that's allowed or not in your run, whether you want to use it or not. I use it because I don't want to waste my time on random chances of getting treasure. And it means I can deploy other units, but you could see it as a glitch or a bug or an exploit if you wanted to view it that way. I think it's up to every player individually. So if you use that, Legault is pretty much not worth deploying in that chapter for desert treasure. The white gem and the guiding ring, they sound nice, but at that point, you've passed the secret shop that like you want to spend most of the money on, and after that, there's not a whole lot of stuff to buy. And the stuff you can buy, you probably still have enough gold for, especially because you get some, you get like the ocean seal that you can sell, for example, in the desert. So there's a lot of gold to go around, even without stealing that white gem and getting that guiding ring. If you want to promote one of your guiding ring users, though, I can see the guiding ring being pretty important. So I don't hate getting it per se. But overall, the way it is, I think Legault, he just shares too much credit, and the things he gets are just too superfluous that I would put him like in the C tier, like probably near the top of it. I think I might have put him too low in my initial tier list. I have him like at this ranking, a little bit lower than the C. But the member card, it is really good, and it's pretty impractical to get it with Matthew instead of Legault, so maybe he should be a bit higher. But it's weird, because like I said, he invalidates himself by getting chest keys, but he's the one who enables you to get these chest keys in the first place. So he doesn't end up seeing use because of something he did in an earlier chapter, so in a way he still gets credit for it. It's strange, I know. Then we have Colm from FE8, Sacred Stones. Sacred Stones is, I think, even more barren when it comes to treasure that you want to get with Thieves, especially because the chest keys, you don't even need to get the member card for them. You could just buy them in chapter, I think after chapter 9 Erica route and chapter 10 Ephraim route, so pretty early on in both cases. And there just aren't that many treasure chests in the first place, because I think the entire mid-game is basically outdoors, with the exception of like chapter 9 Ephraim and chapter 10 Erica, 11 Erica, I want to say. And, well, and then to add to that, you also get a lot of droppable chest keys in this game. You don't get a lot of door keys, but you do get a lot of chest keys. Just from like monsters dropping them in Love and Erica, for example. So even if you don't deploy a thief, you'll generally be able to get like some or most or all of the treasure that is available somewhere. So Thief's not very useful. One cool thing that you can get with Colm very early on is a stealable energy ring from the Chapter 7 Mage. I think that is pretty good, but it's like his main contribution to the whole game. That's like the reason you draft him in draft phase, is just that one energy ring that he can get. So for that, I put him like around Legault's level. I'm kind of tempted to put him below Legault because of the member card that I think is more valuable than the energy ring overall. I think I will do that, but I think it goes either way. Combat-wise, he can get a support with Nami and boost their crit and hit and attack power, which is nice if you're using them as combat units. Most people probably will not unless they like those characters particularly, because they're not super high in the whole hierarchy of combat units in FE8, but it can be a fun option. Without that option, it's not much that lets Colm stand out. He doesn't have one-to range in a game where javelins and hand axes are super good, and there's a lot of good units that can use them, and his mobility is also lower than a lot of those mounted units, so he tends to not scale very well and when it comes to combat in FE8, but he's not completely helpless. Vernac has not a lot to do, honestly. There's no desert item trick, so there's like value to deploying him for getting desert items in FE8. Which is one chapter after he joins in both routes, so that can be helpful. There's a couple of chests for him. The cool thing about him is he's a rogue, just like if you promote Colm, by the way, make him a rogue. He doesn't need to use lockpicks anymore, which can be kind of funny. If you make him assassin, then he cannot steal anymore, so that's also funny. But I think that promotion is up in the air. Whatever you like best, you should just do, because it doesn't really matter too much. But Renak, he's forced into rogue. There's not really anything special for him to do after he joins, really. There's not much utility for him left. The treasure you can get from chests, like the Orson chapter and the Defense chapter Last Hope. The treasure there I often skip, because at that point in the game, it's just so close to being over that there's not much point in getting the treasure, but if you want it, he's there to get it, I guess. But there's still the viable chest keys that he has to contend with. Not much fog of war for him to help with. Not a whole lot of items to steal that are really worth it. Like they exist, there's like a stealable goddess icon in chapter 19, I believe, but it just feels like going out of your way to do something that's just not worth the trouble. So I think Renak is overall D tier. His combat is also hot poo-poo, so that doesn't help either. Alright, next up. Damn, this is getting to be a long video after all. I thought I'd just make this real quick, but it turns out to be a really interesting topic of discussion. Anyhow, we have FE9 to go through. Only two thieves, Folk and Soth, and usually the trend has been that the thief with better combat stats joins later, but in this one, Folk just joins earlier. Folk is pretty good, I think, overall, because, you know, supply and demand. FE9 doesn't have a whole lot of chest keys. You cannot buy them, and there's only a couple droppable ones, but there's more treasure to get. Folk can also steal physics staffs from the enemies, which I think is the most valuable thing for him to take. You can steal weapons in FE9, but only if they're unequipped, and most enemies only have one weapon that is equipped. So that doesn't really end up coming in too often. But a couple good items that he can get for you. Of course, some of them you'll be able to get with chest keys, but not all of them. So he gets like credit for like the third, fourth best items out of this list. So he gets the equivalent of the Delphi Shield in this game. The Full Guard, I think it's called. Kind of similar to the Delphi Shield from Lady. The most units won't really need it, especially with double effectiveness. But it just kind of makes someone like Marcia or Tanith or Jill almost completely invincible against arrows, rather than taking some damage and maybe going down from like that plus a bunch of other chip damage. So helpful item to have. Gold items like, I don't know, gems and stuff, stat boosters. I think there's like a statue frag that he's really good at getting, for example. I don't remember off the top of my head what else. I think there's like a Draco Shield. I just remember from draft races that Volk was like a considerable option. Combat wise, Volk used to be pretty highly rated on the basis of his, like, I think his stats, particularly his growths. I'm trying to see what exactly they are, because right now, if you look at him now, you don't really see the hype anymore. But I think particularly because, yeah, his strength growth is 50%, his speed growth is 65%. His speed and strength are both reasonably close to each other, like 12 and 13 at base. Sounds good. I think it turns like around chapter 10, so like half, like a third way through the game. So they're like decent. The problem is knives have absolute chip might. I think he used to be rated highly on his combat based on like the stiletto being sort of good, but the stiletto I think is like late and kind of rare. So for most of the game he's stuck with the FE9. I think it's called like the knife or something, iron knife. What's it called? I don't remember what it's called, but it's like 1 might or something. It's very bad. Volk's combat is not good at better than your other units, so I don't think it's really worth deploying for combat. But for opening locks and stealing items, like stealing physics, pretty good to have overall. There isn't too much of it overall. I'm trying to think. Was like, I think I put him in like C somewhere. He's near the top of C for me. I guess it's because there's not too much to do overall. I make him sound good just now, but I guess he's not as great as some units there in like B. I'm trying to think, because like I kind of tempted, like based on what I just like said and saw, I kind of want to put him in B, because he sounds more similar to Matthew than anything else. So maybe the bottom of B is where he belongs. I'm gonna put him in bottom of B for now. I actually had him in C before. I can't remember why, but I think actually B is more fitting for him overall. And Soth is like, the biggest difference I think between these two on the surface is that Folk charges 50 gold per lock he picks, and Soth doesn't. I made a tweet once where, because I had a shower thought, like sure Folk charges 50 gold per lock, but he doesn't use lockpicks, he just has lock touch or whatever that allows him to open doors without anything. So he still charges 50 gold, but lockpicks from, like, for example, Matthew in FE7, they cost more than 50 gold per use. So in fact, Matthew's charging more than Folk in a way, because you can just sell the lockpick and get more gold out of them when you think about it. So actually, Folk charges less than them. But Soth picks for free. It doesn't really matter because FE9 you get so much gold, and 50 gold is a drop in a bucket. Like, yeah, you can use gold for forging, and you'll probably run out of gold at some point if you forge every chapter with max crit and max might and everything. But at the same time, 50 gold really isn't going to change that in any way, so I don't think it's very significant. But Soth's combat is absolutely atrocious, especially compared to Folk's, and just really compared to any unit you have whatsoever. And he also joins a couple chapters later, so he misses out on some utility that Folk would have. So I think overall Soth is like a bottom C kind of character. There's some utility for him. I do think he is significantly better than Renak overall, because there's still enough treasure left for him in the game for him to do something. By the way, don't bother training Soth for transfers. It's not worth it. Unless you're like RNG abusing, I guess. I don't think it's worth training him for transfers for Radiant Dawn. Because Radiant Dawn Soth, at the bases that he has, are really freaking good. I think Soth from Radiant Dawn might be the only person worthy of S tier in his whole thief tier list. I think you could argue that Lithis and Laura maybe belong up there, especially Laura, but I think Soth stands out the most. So Soth is the first thief that has combat that's better than every one of your other units that you have for a good amount of time. He's the only unit in the Dawn Brigade in part 1 that is highly mobile, is not in any danger of dying in the first couple chapters, has 1 to range. He doesn't have that right away, but he'll get it very soon when you get Forged Knives, and just overall stellar combat. It doesn't last forever. Part 3 Soth and Part 4 Soth has almost no combat utility whatsoever. Even if you have trained him, his weapons, his cap stats, they just don't hold up as well. But for Part 1 and maybe a little bit of Part 3, he's worth using for combat. On the other hand, there isn't that much treasure to get, but there is enough good treasure that he's the only one to get that makes him still worth using as a thief. So in a way, you can see this S tier as like him being good for both combat and thieves on a level that's like only Parn even comes close to that level of combat mastery and like treasure mastery. Soth, he gets the Beast Foe, which is a really good item to get. Other units can pick up treasure in Radiant Dawn that's like lying around on the ground, the hidden treasure stuff, but thieves have a much higher chance of getting it. I guess technically Soth is a rogue, but you get the point, right? Beast Foe, a Master Seal that you can use to promote your units. Very helpful to like skip a level of bonus XP or getting another promotion in. There's a couple chests that he can get that you get like a couple chest keys, but not enough to go around. The Thany, I guess, is a treasure he could get. Energy Drop is something he can get. You can steal like the Discipline Scroll for gold. Gold is very useful in Radiant Dawn for forging and just generally buying weapons from the Amy's Bargains. This will have to get. The Brave Bow is something you can get in Part 3 to make Leonardo or one of your enemies better. Just a very helpful thief character all around. Part 3 and Part 4 really drops off, but I think honestly the Part 4 utility combined with all the hidden treasure that he can get is worth enough. Not really deploying in a tower even though he's free there. Not really worth using for combat other than maybe if you have like a random enemy flying around that you want to get rid of and your carries are far away, you can use like Soth plus Sanaki to kill like a Wyvern Rider or something that's like threatening your backline. That's what I usually use him for in Part 4 when he's like in the Desert chapter. That's about it. Desert chapter is also a lot of treasure that you can get, and I think he has decent movement and treasure in the Desert too. I remember they do in FE9. That's something else that Folk can do that's like really good, I think, is pick up desert items. because his full movements. They finally gave Thieves full movement in Tellius. Very grateful for that. But yeah, so this is very useful all around, even if his combat falls off really hard in Part 4. And especially, yeah, Part 3, Part 4. Heather is more of a traditional thief in Radiant Dawn in that she doesn't really have very good combat. She can kind of fight. Her avoid is really good. Durability and offense, not so much. Like the traditional low durability, high speed kind of thief, with knives still being shitty as ever. She picks up a couple good treasures with more reliability than other people. The one I can come up with first is the Rescue Staff at the end of 3E. It has a lot of cool tricks you can do with it. Even if you're not LTCing, the Rescue Staff is just a really nice utility staff to have. Get someone out of trouble. That can be very nice. I'm trying to think what else. There's like some treasure in FE in Part 2 that she can get that's kind of slipping my mind right now. I think she steals like an additional discipline scroll somewhere. She can find some random coins somewhere. The Etard is something you can pick up, but I think, yeah, you do have the ability to pick up the Etard with her. You usually wouldn't bother because it's pretty far away from her starting point in 3-4 or 3-4? 3... Yeah, I think it's 3-4, yeah, the one with Ranulf, where you have to seize with both Ike and Ranulf. You get it in the top right of the map. It's usually kind of hard to reach for her, so you should pick it up with someone else. But she can get there if you want her to be. There's some cool stuff with her. You can get a bolting if you get a lot of strength on her, but it's very rare because her strength is Garbo. Her growth is just not possible to really beak spear up unless you're really investing heavily into her. So with that in mind, Heather, I think it's like C, top of C material, roughly, but not a whole lot more than that. The Rescue Staff carries her really far, and there's some stuff she can steal. There's the Nullify, I think, from Part 2. That's really nice to get. I forgot if she has to be there. I know there's some treasure in 2E that she has to be used to get. There's like a couple things that are droppable and a couple things that are stealable. I'm not sure which is which. There's also an energy drop in 3-5 that's really good to get with her, actually. So there's a lot of random stuff. Like the energy drop alone basically puts her equivalent to Colm, and I think there's more treasure for her than there is for Colm. That's kind of how I came up with her position here. But yeah, energy drop from 3-5. And like either a Draco Shield or like a Nullify from 2E is pretty good. Folk and Radiant Dawn, I almost didn't want to put him here, honestly, because he's not really a lockpicker as much as he's the combat unit, kind of like the ninjas. But this is I put his Path of Radiance equivalent here. I kind of felt like it was incomplete without him. But there's not much of a reason to use Folk in a tower. I think that's like the only chapter he's available for, besides like 4 or 5, where there's really not much of a reason to use him, but his combat is like decent enough. He doesn't one-round generals unless he crits or gets lethality, but the chances of that happening are pretty high. I'm not sure if he kills with a crit and a hit at his base stats, or if he needs something else, or if he needs to be like easy or normal mode. I think Folk is like okay-ish, but I think you'll have more units that are better than okay-ish at that point in the game, no matter who you've been training. They'll probably be better than Volk, and chances are there's more than 10 of them, and you'll probably deploy one of them over him. But technically, he's a combat viable unit. I'm going to put him over Renak, but I don't really want to give him more credit than that. He's pretty mediocre in the grand scheme of things. In a vacuum, you could see him being good at combat, but you always have better alternatives. But he's pretty cool. He's pretty cool. Gaius, someone I initially had in D. Rangor argued I should put him in C. I'm almost done with Awakening at this point, and I haven't found Gaius super useful as a thief. There's just not too much for him to do. He cannot steal. There's no stealing items in Awakening, and there's also not too much treasure chests to open. I don't think you can buy chest keys anywhere, but they're pretty rare. But the thing is, Anna exists when I do want to get treasure, and sometimes I just skip treasure and don't notice it. Of course, my Awakening playthrough is not everyone's Awakening playthrough. The way I've been playing, I've had a lot of grinding to make sure I can use all the units I get, like all the kids, all the paralogs, and I've been training units that have just been falling off and doing nothing. Like for late game chapters, I've been training up on level Rickon and Virion just to do dumb stuff with them, and because I grinded so much, my gold economy is completely different from like a normal non-grinding playthrough. So it's possible he has more utility by getting the treasure that I end up skipping just out of laziness. But there's also like competition from Anna, for example, to consider. And Anna joins reasonably early in Awakening. I don't remember exactly when her paralog opens up. I think like chapter 9 or so is when you can get her second paralog and unlock her. So there's only a couple chapters after chapter 6 where Gaius is the only thief. You get like a secret book, I think, in this joining chapter. which is alright. The main utility that I've been pointed out to by Rangor is that he's one of the few characters in Awakening who gives move +1 when he's being paired up. Not to be confused with move +1 as a skill, but he gives the other character that he's paired with a stat bonus of +1 move, kind of like Frederick does as he being a Great Knight. This is a class-based bonus, and it's kind of rare in Awakening, and it opens up some like plays that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Combination with like the Rescue Staff, for example. Mostly useful for like LTCing, of course, but there's sometimes it's nice to have 1 point of movement. It's kind of like having the ability to shove units like an FE9. So I think that can be nice. But overall, I'm not super big on this treasure getting utility, and this combat, I don't think it's anything worth writing home about either. The same as most thieves, like good speed, but not much else. I do appreciate him giving a bunch of speed on pair-ups though. There have been a couple spots where, like the Inigo paralog, where I was going in under-leveled, giving a bunch of speed to someone to get like a double attack in. Like I would pair up Gaius and Longku to get a really fast unit for a second. Stuff like that has been useful occasionally, but overall, I don't think Gaius is worth much. I'm gonna put him over Soth, and that's about where I would end it. I could see him over Cath, but not a whole lot more than that. Anna, I think, is much more interesting. Actual unit with good basis in Awakening and not needing much growth. She still has really good growth, don't get me wrong, because this is Awakening. But Anna's combat is pretty good. She lacks supports, which makes her like hard to justify using long term. You pretty much have to pair her with Robin, I think, to get a good long-term Anna going. I'm gonna check real quick what she has again, because I think she has more than one support. Not entirely sure. But yeah, her bases are just really good. She's very fast. I'm trying to see class sets. Oh, right. Her class sets are kind of worthless. She could go Mage, Sage to do that stuff, but I'm kind of assuming she stays Trickster for now. So stick with the theme of the Thieves. But I don't hate the idea of going Mage. I saw that in a 0% growth run. I thought it was pretty cool. But I've been getting some utility out of her as like a Trickster that sees combat occasionally. She's kind of nice with the like the Levin sword to deal like magical damage to enemies and actually get 1-on KOs sometimes. So that's a much better than like what you would expect out of a random thief that just joins in the mid game. So I liked her a lot. She has move +1, I'm pretty sure. I think she also gives move +1 to her para partner, because that's what Trickster does. I'm trying to see if maybe I can see that with Oifi bot real quick. Trickster. Yeah, Parab gives move +1 from her as well. And then she has move +1 at base as well as Lock Touch. So that's pretty cool. Sea Swords is good enough for Levin Sword and most of the things you wanted to use. Not the Brave Sword, that one is A, but other than that, she's pretty good. D rank staffs is kind of nice. Honestly, the most useful staff for Awakening in most units is the Rescue Staff, which is E rank. But the ability to use Mend, for example, has been nice on occasion. Nice stand-in healer. I often deployed either her or Libra as a filler in the mid game for a long time, just to have staff utility around with pretty good range. Like that's the other thing about having semi-high magic. Like 18 magic is pretty good. She actually has pretty good rescue range, so she can pull people like actually out of trouble. So I think I had her at A rank below Parn, so that's where I'll put her for now. That seems fair to me. Pretty good. The only thing that really hurts her is the lack of supports. If you want to pair with Robin though, you'll have a pretty good unit. The Fates ones, the ones I'm least familiar with out of all, but a little bit because I have played Conquests twice or so. I think Niles is a good example of utility outside of combat and thievery. I mean, you can't steal in Fates, but you can still open a bunch of treasure chests, and the chests in Fates are pretty good to really good. Things like, I think you get like the Rescue Staff from a chest, for example. The cool thing about Fates is it gives you chest keys for a lot of the time, but they vanish after one chapter. So you can only really use them on the treasure chest in that chapter itself. So it stops you from hoarding, which I think is pretty cool. But generally, I just get in with Niles out of habit anyway, or Kaze, one of the lock touch people. Again, I'm not doing the other lock touch units like the ninjas because they're more combat units, and the video is pretty long already at this point. So we're just going with the outlaws and the adventurers right now. But Conquest Niles really good. Very early joining, good against mages as far as I can tell, despite the weapon triangle. 2 range is nice because Conquest avoiding a counter is big since the enemies are so strong, and his combat is just good in general. Capturing is nice, both for capturing enemies that you actually want to use, like Haitaka, for example, is a pretty common capture target. Rallyman is the big one, of course. He's the only unit you can capture, so it's pretty much exclusively his utility. And capturing also, sometimes it gives you like a unit that you just want to use for like a couple chapters and just not use again. Like someone with Shove, for example, can be kind of nice, but that doesn't really happen all that often, I think. But if you plan your playthrough well, you might be able to make use of that. I suck at planning, so I don't really make use of that. It's one of the reasons I'm so bad at Conquest. What else does Niles really do? I'm trying to think, there was something else. I mean, Rallyman is the big one for capturing, and then Lock Touch is pretty good. Other than that, oh yeah, I was gonna say, when I use Niles in my Conquest runs, I noticed that like early game, his combat stood out. He was like really fast and nice to have. Later on, I found that his lack of durability hurt me more often than not, and I found it hard to justify using him in combat when I could use like Xander instead. That goes for most combat units in Fates, but I noticed that Niles is like especially fragile. But I'm sure that if you're better than me, you can pull it off better. I think he also has a lot of utility in the Ninja Cave, same with Shura, in the fact that he has weapon triangle over all the ninjas, and if you put a tanky unit like, I don't know, I would use Xander, but I guess you could use Benny as well, put them in front of him, you have like a team that can actually one round enemy ninjas and actually enemy phase them, because usually the problem with ninjas is you can't counter one to range without making your actual combat garbage with like a javelin. Siegfried is not very good against those enemies either. So what you're left with is not using one to range, and then you cannot enemy phase them at all unless you use a wall. So what you would do is you put like Xander in front of them, and they don't want to attack Xander because he doesn't take any damage. They don't really see that they can debuff him and then attack him again, so they just don't attack Xander. And then you put like Niles behind them, and they will attack Niles because they don't want to attack Xander, and Niles is the only person they can attack in range that they want to. And then Niles counters them and one-rounds them. And if you dodge, you don't get debuffed, so then you can actually one-round multiple ninjas. And there's setups with that and Shura as well that work really well. That I definitely recommend trying if you have trouble with a ninja chapter. I'm definitely going to try that if I play Conquest again. So I think Niles goes in like the A tier. I think he's pretty good. You could argue him for B, I think. I don't have a big preference either way. I'm going to put him like around here, I think is where I wanted him. Trying to see. I had him like between the FE6 Thieves. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I'm just going to put him here for now, like over the FE6 Thieves. But I could see going either way. Shura, less availability, but combat-wise, you can still do most of the things that Niles does with Shura. Of course, Shura has that weird trade-off where you can either get him or the boots, but not both. Boots are only +1 move. I've said this before, I think, when rating him on like the big tier list, but I want to repeat it again because it's such a weird misconception that I want to, you know, stamp. So Shura gives move +1 on pair up. So a lot of people argue that you should never kill off Shura because you can either get move +1 from the boots, or you can get move +1 by pairing up Shura. So why would you give up a good unit just to get move +1? The reason is there is more of an opportunity cost to using Shura than that boots. You know, it's you have to deploy him. So if Shura is better than the unit you would deploy instead, then that trade-off makes sense, right? If your alternative deployment, like your 10th deployment or whatever Conquest gives room for, is worse than Shura, which chances is there are, then Shura is better. But if you have 10 better units than Shura, there's no reason to, you know, have him around, because you're just giving up a deployment slot and a unit slot, or rather a unit that you need to keep feeding XP to keep relevant. Then suddenly it's a different story. I don't know a whole lot about Conquest to think of 10 better or worse units than Shura, but that's the real trade-off you gotta make. It's like, would I deploy Shura if I got him for free? That's really the question you gotta ask. Also worth noting, I think, is that you're not always paired up, and you don't always have that +1 move from pair up. You don't always want to have it. Sometimes you don't want to be, you know, in guard stance. Sometimes you want to be in attack stance and actually counter enemies. In those cases, you don't always have move +1 for the next turn. It depends on like how you go about your turn economy, of course. But just because he gives move +1 on pair up doesn't mean that he's a worse choice than the boots or a better choice than the boots. It really depends on the situation, what you have planned. Also, if you give someone the boots, you can still give him a move +1 pair up, and they will have more movement than they would have before if you just had Shura, because you can't give someone 2 move +1 pair ups, but you can give him boots and a move +1 pair up. Other than that, Shura is a decent combat unit as far as I know in Conquest. I think I used him, Mr. Boomer, in the chapter for that thing I just mentioned for Niles, and he was able to do it at base with like a tonic. So I always really like it when units can just do that at base, and it makes him really favorable for me. I think availability-wise, he loses out on Niles, so I'm going to put him in B. He also doesn't have to capture a utility that Niles has, so I think it's fair to put like a tier gap between them. And the boots are an opportunity cost. It closes a couple doors, I think, for like endgame clears to not have the boots. I know it's still possible, but there's like a certain combination of things you need to get an endgame clear, and having Shura closes off a couple of those options. But I'm not going to say like he disables like a quick endgame clear. That's not the case at all. But yeah, he's a good class set. Outlaw is just good. I think he's an adventurer, but he can go Outlaw. Let me just double check before I put my foot in the wrong place. Niles, Shura, Adventure, that's what he's called, right? I think he can go like Bow Knight. I've heard of people wanting to put him on Shuriken Breaker. I haven't tried that out yet. I never got Shuriken Breaker on him last time I played. I think I got too late. I was late to the party, but even just his personal skill, Highwayman, is kind of nice in the class that he's in. Just weaken people farthest to kill, basically, is what he does. And then staff utility can be kind of nice, just heal people when they get hurt. Stuff like that. I don't know, this is a good unit all around. Not much opportunity cost. I could see him being worse than your best units if you've been training diligently or if you have your whole playthrough planned out. But if you're chaotic like me, then maybe you'll have room for him. Finally, Ashe. I put him here as a bit of a joke because he's not really a thief. He can become one, of course, because everyone in 3 houses can become one. I put him here because his personal skill is lock touch, so he can just open doors and pick locks. I think the thing about that is like you can buy chest keys and door keys in the shop in this game, so it just saves you gold to use Ashe instead. And it usually just isn't worth deploying Ashe just to open locks with. Like you just rather just use Byleth with a door key. Like Byleth with the infinite convoy space could just do that instead. There's not even that many chests to get in the first place. I skip a lot of chests when I play 3 houses these days. They're just not worth the side objectives overall. And then Ashe's combat is also worse than most units. Like, we can talk about what he can do all day, but the fact is he's usually worth it. His best class by far is Sniper, a class that everyone can pull off just because Hunter's Volley is really good, but everyone can do it. And he's not even the best at it. It's just the only thing he can really pull off. He can go Wyvern. His boons are alright for Wyvern, but not fantastic. He still needs some help to get there. And even when he gets there, his stats just don't hold up in maddening mode. Easier modes, go nuts. You can do whatever you like, but I would not recommend using Ashe in maddening mode. You can get away with it. You can get away with anything if you want to. Like, don't worry about it. Think of it more as a high effort thing. But yeah, I think he's the worst unit on this list overall. I could see him over Renak maybe, but that's about where I'd end it. I'd honestly rather put him here. 3 houses doesn't have any unusably bad units though. But yeah, as a thief, it doesn't really add anything. The one cool thing it can do, I guess, because the chest key takes up an inventory slot and you only have the one use once, it will always vanish when you use it. So when you open a chest with most units, you cannot send it to convoy. But because Ashe doesn't spend an item use opening a chest, you can send the item that you get to convoy, or something else if you want something else to be sent to convoy. So something dumb you can do, for example, if you want to use the knowledge gem in chapter, the Sothis chapter, like you want to use it right away, you can send Ashe to get the treasure and then send it to convoy, and then you can have Byleth pick it up and use it right away against the wolves when he's fighting them. That's something you can do. That's all I can think of. That's Ashe's best utility, opening chests like that to send it to convoy. That's all, isn't it? I mean, like I said, this is basically A tier, so I could just move these like up to A tier if you want me to, but I'm not gonna because it makes everything look ugly. But yeah, this is basically A tier. Or unless there's someone I'm missing, could there be someone I'm missing? Let me see. I got an SS tier here. There we go. Of course, top tier Jafar. That's where I put Jafar for carrying my run. We all know realistically I would put him in C tier for his contributions in FE7. There's not much thief utility he can do. He has good combat utility against Valkyries on player phase, but it's not much better than using a brave weapon. But he carried my run, so he goes up there. That's all I got to say. Peace out. Goodbye. Hope you enjoyed it.